The first thing the demon told me was that I had already interviewed him once. I had never seen him before. That was what made me stay in the room. If he had threatened me, I would have left. If he had screamed, cursed, or quoted the scripture backward, I would have known what I was dealing with. I had spent 23 years working with people who claimed to be possessed, people who heard voices, people who believed something had followed them home from cemeteries, abandoned houses, war zones, and places where human beings had done things they could never forgive themselves for. I knew the tricks. I knew the patterns. I knew that fear could make a tired priest mistake coincidence for revelation. And I knew that the most dangerous thing an investigator could do was believe an entity simply because it knew something it shouldn't. But that night, at 2:17 in the morning, I was sitting alone in a windowless room beneath a federal medical facility in the western Pennsylvania, staring through reinforced glass at something that had asked for me by name. Not father, not reverend, not doctor. My first name. Daniel. That was the first word it spoke. It said it gently, almost kindly. Then it smiled. And I understood immediately why the men who had been watching that room for 11 days had stopped calling the thing an animal, a patient, an anomaly, or even an entity. They had started calling it a witness. My name is Father Daniel Mercer. At least that is the name I used publicly after I entered the priesthood. There are 3 people alive who know the name my mother gave me before she died. One of them is my older sister. One is a priest in Rome. And the third was sitting 12 feet away from me, behind glass, in a room with no windows, no microphone that could be seen. No files in front of him. No reason to know anything about me. He looked like an ordinary man. That was the second thing that frightened me. He was perhaps 50 years old, although there was something about his face that made age impossible to determine. His hair was gray at the temples. His skin was pale, but not unnaturally so. He wore a plain gray hospital shirt and loose trousers. His hands rested on the table, 5 fingers on each. No claws, no wounds, no black eyes, nothing dramatic. The room itself had been designed to prevent exactly that kind of drama. There were no religious symbols inside. That had been deliberate. The men who arranged the interview believed religious objects might provoke the subject. I thought that was nonsense. After 23 years, I had learned that evil rarely cared about furniture. The door behind me opened. A man in a dark suit entered. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and looked like someone who had spent his entire career telling people things they were not allowed to repeat. Father Mercer, I turned. You have 10 minutes. You said 20. We changed our minds. Why? He looked through the glass. The thing inside was staring directly at him. The man's expression tightened. Because he has started asking questions. About what? About us. I waited. He didn't continue. Who are you? Special Operations. It's not an agency. No. Then what agency? He looked at me for a long moment. You don't need to know. That answer irritated me. I'd been called into enough classified situations to recognize the smell of bureaucracy. Usually, secrecy meant somebody was afraid of embarrassment. But this was different. There were 8 armed guards outside. 2 doctors had refused to enter the containment area. A neurologist had quit 3 days earlier. A psychiatrist had attempted to sedate the subject and ended up hospitalized himself after suffering a seizure. And according to the file I had been given, the subject had been discovered 9 days earlier inside an abandoned church near Fayette County. The church had been empty for 37 years. There was no electricity, no water, no furniture, no basement access. Yet when investigators entered the building after receiving reports of lights moving inside, they found a man sitting beneath the old altar. He was barefoot. He was clean. He had no fingerprints. That was the first impossible thing. The second was that his body temperature was 98.6 degrees. Exactly. For 9 days. It had never changed. The third was the blood. They had drawn 4 vials. 3 were normal. The fourth contained blood that belonged to no known human type. But that was not why they called me. They called me because the man had asked for a Catholic priest. Not just any priest. Me. I looked back through the glass. He was still smiling. "Why did you ask for me?" I said through the intercom. The man tilted his head. "Because you were the only one who would come. I was summoned." "No." His smile disappeared. "You were invited." I felt something cold move through my stomach. "Who invited me?" He leaned toward the microphone. "You did." For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he laughed. Not loudly, just once. Like someone who had remembered an old joke. I reached for the recorder on the table. The red light was already blinking. "State your name." "My name has many translations." "Give me one." He looked at me. "Abel." I almost laughed. "That's not a demon's name." "No." His eyes softened. "It's a man's name." "Then why use it?" "Because you still trust it." I stared at him. He leaned back. "That is why I chose it." I made a note. "What should I call you?" "Call me what the others called me." "And what did they call you?" He looked toward the ceiling. For the first time, something changed in his expression. Not fear, regret. "They called me the Keeper of the Unsaid." I wrote it down. Then he said something that made my pen stop. "I was there when you performed the exorcism in Ohio." I looked up. "Which one?" "The boy." My throat tightened. "What boy?" "The one you couldn't save." I didn't move. The room seemed to become smaller. I had performed dozens of exorcisms. Only one had ended, with a death I still carried with me. His name was Matthew. He was 17. He died in a hospital outside Toledo. Officially, Matthew had suffered cardiac arrest following a prolonged seizure. That was the medical explanation. It wasn't the truth. The truth was that for 3 nights, Matthew had spoken in voices that did not belong to him. On the final night, he had looked directly at me and said something I had never told anyone. He said, "Father, you don't believe God is listening anymore." Matthew died 2 minutes later. I had never told anyone that sentence. Not my bishop, not my sister, not the priest who had trained me. No one. I looked into the glass. "How do you know about Matthew?" Abel smiled. "I don't." "Then why did you say his name?" "I didn't." I felt the blood leave my face. "You said the boy." "Yes." "His name was Matthew." "You gave him the name." "No." Abel leaned closer. "You did." I stared at him. "His mother named him Matthew." "No." His voice became almost a whisper. "You did." The room was silent. Then he said something I had not expected. "You gave him the name when you baptized him." I remembered. Not because I had forgotten, because I had tried very hard not to remember. Matthew's parents had requested an emergency baptism during his first hospitalization. I had performed it. But there had been another name written on the hospital form. A name his mother had whispered to me. A name they had intended to give him if he survived. I had asked why. She said it was a family name. I had never recorded it. I had never spoken it aloud. Abel looked at me. Do you want me to tell you what they almost named him? I didn't answer. He did anyway. Michael. The recorder clicked. Once. And then stopped. The red light went dark. I stared at it. Abel looked at the ceiling. That was not supposed to happen yet. What wasn't? The machine. I looked toward the observation window. The man in the suit was standing on the other side. He was talking rapidly into a phone. I turned back. Abel was looking at me. Father? What? Do you know why Satan hates human beings? Because they belong to God. No. His voice was calm. That is what you were taught. Then why? Because humans can change. I waited. He continued. Angels cannot. That sentence stayed with me. I had heard theological arguments about fallen angels before. Their rebellion, their pride, their refusal to serve humanity, their hatred of the incarnation. But Abel spoke differently. Not like a theologian, like someone describing an old battlefield. You think demons hate you because you're weak, he said. And that's only partly true. What do they hate? Your uncertainty. I said nothing. Your ability to wake up one morning and become someone you weren't yesterday. He smiled faintly. That is what frightened him. Satan? Don't call him that. Why? Because names have power. You just told me your name has many translations. Mine does. His doesn't. Abel looked at me. For him, names are chains. Something moved in the ventilation duct above us. I glanced up. When I looked back, Abel was no longer smiling. Ask me why I refused. Why did you refuse? He leaned forward. Because he ordered me to do something I had never done before. What? I was ordered to remove a choice. I frowned. From whom? From a man. Whose choice? His own. I waited. Abel looked toward the door. That is why you are here. I felt a pressure inside my chest. You want me to believe Satan can control free will? No. Then what are you saying? I'm saying he found a way to make free will irrelevant. The fluorescent light above us flickered. Once, twice, then remained steady. Abel smiled again. Now you understand why I was afraid. I didn't. Not yet. But I would. Over the next 6 hours, I would hear a story that began in a monastery burned in 1348, passed through a battlefield in Virginia, appeared in the death records of a psychiatric hospital in Louisiana, and ended with a sentence written in my own handwriting. A sentence I did not remember writing. And somewhere between those events, I would discover the real reason Abel had refused Satan. It wasn't because he had found God. It wasn't because he had developed compassion. It wasn't because he had suddenly understood that evil was wrong. Abel was still evil. He told me that himself. He had killed people. Thousands, perhaps. He had manipulated kings. He had encouraged wars. He had whispered into the minds of desperate men. He had watched children die. He had done things that made me sick to hear described. And when I asked him whether he regretted any of it, he said no. Then I asked him why he was afraid. His answer changed the way I understood every case I had ever investigated. I am not afraid of what Satan wants to do to humanity, he said. I am afraid of what he wants to do to God. I didn't understand. Not then. But I should have. Because the first rule of dealing with demons is simple. They lie. The second rule is more important. Sometimes the truth is the most dangerous lie they can tell. And I was about to discover that Abel had spent centuries learning exactly how to tell the difference. The interview resumed at 2:43. A technician replaced the recorder. This time, 2 cameras were activated. The man in the suit entered the observation room. He introduced himself as Colonel Samuel Rusk. I had never heard of him. He told me nothing about the organization he represented. But he gave me one instruction. If the subject begins speaking about your childhood, terminate the interview. I asked why. He said, because that means he is no longer talking to you. What does that mean? Rusk looked through the glass. It means he is talking to something behind you. I turned. There was nothing there. When I looked back, Abel was smiling. Your colonel is afraid, he said. He has reason to be. No, Abel shook his head. He has memory. I glanced at Rusk. He had gone pale. Abel continued. That is different. What happened to him? Ask him. Rusk stepped toward the intercom. Don't. Abel laughed softly. You remember the tunnel, Samuel? Rusk froze. I looked at him. What tunnel? He didn't answer. Abel's smile disappeared. You should leave, Colonel. Rusk stared at him. Why? Because you are about to remember. Rusk left the room. The door closed. Abel looked at me. Now we can talk. What happened in the tunnel? You'll ask me that later. I ask now. You'll ask me after I tell you about 1348. I frowned. Why 1348? Because that was the first time we tried. Tried what? To remove the choice. He leaned back. Do you know what happened in Europe that year? The plague. The Black Death. Yes. History says it spread through fleas, rats, trade routes, and human movement. That's broadly accurate. Broadly? His eyes narrowed. That word has saved your species many times. I said nothing. People died in enormous numbers. Entire villages disappeared. Priests buried hundreds. Physicians became overwhelmed. Families abandoned one another. Yes. Do you know what the demons did? I waited. We watched. That's all? No. He smiled. We learned. Learned what? How quickly human beings surrender their choices when they believe there are no choices left. The room felt colder. Abel continued. Fear does not remove free will, Father. It makes people volunteer it. I wrote that down. He watched me. That was the first lesson. And the second? We discovered that despair could become inherited. Meaning? A father tells his son the world is ending. The son believes him. The son tells his children. Soon the belief exists without anyone remembering who started it. That's not supernatural. No, Abel smiled. That was the point. He told me about a village in northern Italy. He did not give it a name. He said names had been lost. There were 87 inhabitants when the fever arrived. 3 weeks later, 20 remained. The village priest began recording confessions. At first, people confessed ordinary sins, adultery, theft, violence, hatred. Then something changed. The confessions became identical. Not the sins, the words. One after another, people began saying, I am no longer certain that my thoughts belong to me. The priest believed the plague had driven them mad. Abel said that wasn't what happened. They were discovering something. What? That fear could be taught without being spoken. How? Through repetition. He looked directly at me. That is why I asked you to notice the phrase. What phrase? The one you heard when you were 12. I felt my stomach tighten. He knew. I had spent years trying not to think about that. When I was 12, my mother had taken me to a small church after my father disappeared. I remembered the church. I remembered the rain. I remembered my mother crying. I remembered a priest telling me that my father would come home. He never did. But there was one thing I had never understood. The priest had leaned toward me and said something I could not hear. I had forgotten the words, or thought I had. Abel whispered them. "Nothing you choose is ever truly yours." I stopped breathing. That was the phrase. Exactly. I had not remembered it in 40 years. "Who told you that?" Abel didn't answer. "Who told you?" "You." I was 12. "Yes." I didn't say it. "No." Abel leaned closer. "Someone said it to you." "Who?" "You already know." I looked at the glass. My reflection stared back. For one terrible moment, I thought there was someone standing beside me in the reflection. I turned. Nothing. When I looked again, Abel was watching the reflection too. "Don't look behind you," he said. I didn't. "Why?" "Because if you see him, he'll know you can." "Who?" Abel's voice dropped. "The first one." I swallowed. "The first demon?" "No." He looked almost sad. "The first human." The lights went out. Complete darkness filled the room. I heard something scrape against the floor. Then Abel said my name. Not Daniel. The name my mother gave me. The one I had never told anyone. The room remained dark. And for the first time in my life, I was afraid to pray. Not because I thought something would hear me, because I was suddenly terrified that something already had. The lights returned 7 seconds later. Abel was still sitting at the table, but his hands were no longer on the surface. They were folded together, like a priest. "Who are you?" I asked. He looked at me. "I told you." "No," I shook my head. "You told me what you wanted me to call you." "That is the same thing." "It isn't." Abel smiled. "Good." "What?" "You are finally asking the right question." He looked at the camera, then at the door, then back at me. "I am not the demon you were supposed to interview." I felt the room tilt. "Then who am I supposed to interview?" Abel's expression changed. For the first time, genuine fear crossed his face. "The one who refused to stay outside." The intercom crackled. A voice came through. Colonel Rusk. "Father, end the interview." I reached for the switch. Abel spoke before I could. "Don't." I froze. "Why?" "Because he isn't outside anymore." Rusk's voice came again. "Father, open the door," Abel whispered. "That isn't Colonel Rusk." I looked toward the observation window. The room beyond was empty. The colonel was gone. I stood. Abel remained seated. "Don't open the door." Something knocked from the hallway. 3 times, slowly. Knock, knock, knock. Then a voice spoke through the door, my own voice. "Father, it's me." Abel closed his eyes. "That's the first trick." "What?" "It wants you to believe you are already outside." The knocking stopped. Silence. Then the voice returned. "Daniel." I stared at the door. "Don't answer." The voice said, "You've been here before." I looked at Abel. He opened his eyes. "Now." "What?" "Ask me the question." "What question?" "The one you came here to ask." "I came to ask why you refused Satan." "No." He shook his head. "You came to ask whether you were still free." I felt something inside me break. Not physically. Something deeper. A certainty. A belief I had carried since childhood. The belief that no matter how dark the world became, there was always one thing God had left untouched. Choice. Abel stared at me. "That is what he is trying to take." "How?" He leaned toward me. "He doesn't want your soul." The room became silent. "He wants your decision." I didn't understand. What's the difference? Everything. Abel's voice was almost gentle. A soul can be condemned. A soul can repent. A soul can be lost, restored, forgiven, transformed. He paused. But a decision, he looked toward the ceiling. A decision is proof that something inside creation can still become different. I stared at him. What does Satan want? Abel answered with 6 words. He wants to make tomorrow inevitable. The words seemed absurd. Then they weren't. He explained it slowly, not as a prophecy, as a mechanism. Satan had spent centuries searching for a way to attack the one thing demons could never possess. Human unpredictability. Not human intelligence, not human bodies, not even human souls. Choice. Every human decision created a possibility. A man could forgive instead of killing. A woman could confess instead of lying. A soldier could lower his weapon. A frightened child could tell the truth. A dying person could forgive someone who deserved no forgiveness. According to Abel, those moments were not insignificant. They were the reason evil could never become absolute. As long as one human being can choose differently, he said, evil cannot finish the story. And Satan wants to finish it. Yeah. By killing everyone? No. Then how? Abel stared at me. By teaching humanity that every choice has already been made. I sat down, he continued. Imagine a world where every person believes their thoughts are predetermined, every desire explained, every impulse justified, every betrayal inevitable, every act of cruelty excused before it happens. That would be psychological manipulation. It would be more than that. He placed one finger on the table. If enough people believe their choices are predetermined, their choices become predictable. He placed another finger beside it. If enough choices become predictable, they can be anticipated. A third finger. If enough decisions can be anticipated, he stopped. I whispered, controlled. He shook his head. Not controlled. What then? Removed. The words stayed between us. I remembered Matthew, his final words. Father, you don't believe God is listening anymore. I suddenly understood why Abel had mentioned him. Not because Matthew had been possessed, because Matthew had been tested. What happened to him? Abel looked at me. He chose. What did he choose? Not to believe the voice. Then why did he die? Because he succeeded. I stared. That doesn't make sense. It does. Abel's face hardened. The demon inside him was ordered to make him believe his choice was inevitable. But he resisted. Yes. So why did he die? Because the order was changed. I felt cold. Changed to what? Make the priest doubt. My breath caught. Me? Yes. Why? Because if you stopped believing that human beings could choose against evil, you would become useful. I looked down at my hands. For 23 years, I had called myself a priest. For 23 years, I had believed I was helping people fight something outside themselves. But Matthew's death had changed me. After that case, I still prayed. I still performed exorcisms. I still believed in God. But something inside me had become cautious. I stopped expecting miracles. I stopped asking why. I stopped believing that faith meant certainty. I thought that was maturity. Abel called it something else. That was the first seed. What seed? Doubt in the freedom of your own soul. I looked up. Why me? He smiled. Because you survived. Survived what? The first interview. My heart stopped. What interview? The one you don't remember. He told me there had been another room, another night, years earlier. I had been 29. Before seminary, before Rome, before ordination. I had forgotten it completely. Abel said that was intentional. The memory was removed. By whom? By you. That's impossible. No, he smiled. You asked me to do it. I stood. You expect me to believe that? I don't care what you believe. Then why tell me? Because you are almost out of time. Time for what? He looked at the clock. It read 3:33. I looked away. When I looked back, it read 3:34, then 3:33 again. Abel sighed. He's close. Who? You keep asking the wrong name. The lights flickered. The sound came from the hallway. Someone was crying. It sounded like a child. I closed my eyes. Abel whispered, "Don't listen." The crying became louder. Then a little girl's voice said, "Father?" My heart clenched. I knew that voice, my sister's voice, when she was 8, before she was born. I opened my eyes. Abel was staring at me. "That's impossible," I whispered. "No." He looked afraid again. "That's exactly what I was afraid of." "What?" "He has learned to use memories that never happened." The door began to shake. Not violently, just enough to make the hinges tremble. Abel stood. For the first time since I entered the room, he looked like something other than a man. His shadow moved before he did. I saw it stretch across the floor, then it stopped. Abel looked at his own shadow. He's here. The door opened. Colonel Rusk stood outside. His face was expressionless. His eyes were open, but he wasn't blinking. He looked at me. "Father Mercer?" Abel stepped backward. "Do not let him speak." Rusk smiled. "I was wrong." I stood frozen. Rusk looked at Abel. "You were never supposed to be here." Abel's voice was barely audible. "Neither were you." Rusk looked at me. "Father, I need you to understand something," Abel shouted. "Don't listen!" Rusk's mouth opened. And when he spoke, the voice that came out was not his. It was mine. "You have already chosen." I couldn't move. The voice continued. "You chose when you came." Abel grabbed the table and threw it toward the door. Rusk stepped aside. The table struck the wall. For 1 second, I saw something behind Rusk, a shape, tall, thin, almost human. Then it was gone. Abel looked at me. "Run." I didn't, because I finally understood the terrible truth. The interview had never been about finding out why Abel betrayed Satan. It had been about finding out whether I would believe him. And if I did, that would be my choice. But if I didn't, that might be my choice too. The thing behind Rusk smiled, and I realized there was only one way to win. Not by choosing correctly. By choosing something it could not predict. So I did the one thing no demon expected. I forgave it. Not Abel, not Satan. The thing behind them. I forgave it for what it had done. I forgave it for what it would do. I forgave it without understanding why. The room went silent. Rusk collapsed. Abel screamed, not in anger, in terror. The shadow disappeared. The clock stopped. And for one impossible second, I felt something I had not felt since I was a child. Freedom. Not certainty, not safety. Freedom. Abel fell to his knees. He looked at me, and he began to laugh. "You did it." I stared at him. "What?" "You chose something he could not use. Is it over?" Abel shook his head. "No." "Then what did I accomplish?" He looked toward the dark corner of the room. "You proved he was wrong." "About what?" Abel smiled sadly. that you would always choose what he expected. The door behind me opened. No one was standing there. The hallway beyond was empty. I walked out. I never saw Abel again. Officially, the facility never existed. Colonel Rusk died 3 weeks later. The report said cardiac failure. Well, the medical examiner found no explanation for why every clock in his home had stopped at 3:33. The abandoned church in Pennsylvania was demolished. No body was found. No records of Abel existed. No fingerprints. No DNA. Nothing. For months, I tried to convince myself that the entire experience had been a psychological breakdown. I wanted that explanation. I needed it. I returned to my parish. I prayed, I worked, I stopped performing exorcisms. I told myself I had made a mistake. Then 6 months later, a letter arrived. No stamp, no return address, just my name. Inside was a single sheet of paper. There were 6 words. He was right about tomorrow. Underneath them was a date, August 14th. No year. That was 3 years ago. I still have the letter. I keep it locked in a box. I have never shown it to another priest. Because there is something else I haven't told you. The handwriting on that letter is mine. I recognized it immediately. But I did not write it. At least not yet. And that is why I am telling you this now. Because yesterday, I found another letter beneath my bedroom door. This one had only one sentence. I know what you will choose. I burned it. The ashes turned into dust. Then the dust arranged itself on my floor. 6 words. The same 6 words Abel spoke before I left that room. You are not afraid of me. I stared at them for a long time. Then I understood. Abel had never said he refused Satan because he became good. He refused because Satan had discovered something even demons could not tolerate. A world where every choice was predetermined would not be a world without evil. It would be a world without meaning. And if every human decision could be predicted, then love would become meaningless. Forgiveness would become meaningless. Sacrifice would become meaningless. Faith would become meaningless. Even rebellion would become meaningless because nothing would truly be chosen. That was Satan's final plan, not to destroy humanity, to make humanity incapable of surprising God. And Abel had discovered something even worse. The plan was already working. Not in demons, in us. Every time we say, that's just who I am. Every time we excuse cruelty as inevitable. Every time we tell ourselves we cannot change. Every time we decide our future has already been written. We surrender a little more. And somewhere something listens. I still don't know whether Abel was telling me the truth. Maybe he was lying. Maybe the entire story was another manipulation. Maybe the demon in that room never existed. Maybe Colonel Rusk was a sick man. Maybe the clocks failed. Maybe I was exhausted. Maybe every supernatural detail had an explanation I was too frightened to find. I can live with that. What I cannot explain is what happened 3 nights ago. I was praying alone in my bedroom. I had finished the final prayer and was about to turn off the light when I heard someone behind me. A man's voice. Calm, old, almost amused. Father. I turned. Nobody was there. Then the voice said, "You should have asked what happened to the first human." I couldn't move. I knew that voice. Abel. I asked the question anyway. What happened? The room became completely silent. Then he answered. He made the first choice. I whispered, "What choice?" The voice came closer. So close I could feel the warmth of breath against my ear. To become human. I turned. Nothing. But on the wall in front of me, written in the darkness where no ink could have been, were 3 words. You already did. I have not slept properly since. I don't know what they mean. I don't know if they refer to me. I don't know if Abel was the first human. I don't know if Satan ever existed in the way I was taught. And I don't know whether God is listening when I pray. But I still pray. That is the one thing I have chosen not to surrender. Because after everything I learned, I finally understand what frightened Abel. It was never that Satan might take our souls. It was never that demons might kill us. It was never even that hell might be real. The real horror is simpler. It is the possibility that one day we will stop believing we can choose. And when that day comes, we won't need demons to control us. We will do it ourselves. So if you ever hear a voice telling you that your choices don't matter, that you cannot change, that you are exactly what your worst mistake made you, do not believe it. Not because I can prove you are free, I can't. Believe it because the alternative is exactly what something very old has been waiting for. And if the demon who sat across from me that night was telling the truth, then Satan's greatest victory will not be the day humanity dies. It will be the day humanity looks into the mirror, hears a voice say, "You have no choice," and quietly agrees. Because that is the moment evil stops needing permission. And that is the moment we give it everything. I thought the story ended there. I was wrong. 3 days after I found the words on my wall, I received a phone call from a number that did not exist. I know how that sounds. Numbers can be spoofed. Caller identification can be manipulated. Technology can make ordinary things look impossible. I told myself that before I answered. The call came at 4:06 in the morning. I almost ignored it. Then I saw the final 4 digits. They were 0317, my father's old military identification number. I had not seen those numbers since I was 12. I answered. Nobody spoke. I could hear breathing. I got out of bed. There was a sheet of paper lying on the hallway floor. I hadn't put it there. I didn't want to touch it. I knew that feeling. The instinct that tells you something ordinary has become dangerous. But I picked it up anyway. There was a single sentence written across the page. Not in Rusk's handwriting. Not in mine. In Abel's. Come back before he remembers you. I drove to Pennsylvania that morning. I did not tell my bishop. I did not tell my sister. And I certainly did not tell the police. I knew how that would sound. A priest claiming a dead military officer had called him. A priest claiming a demon had sent him a letter. A priest returning to an abandoned church because something might be waiting there. But there was another reason I didn't tell anyone. I was afraid they would come with me. And I had learned something in that underground room. Whatever was happening did not seem to spread like an infection. It spread like an invitation. The more people knew about it, the more opportunities it seemed to have. So I went alone. The church had been demolished. That was what the county record said. I found the address anyway. A narrow road through trees, a rusted gate, a field covered in weeds. Nothing remained where the church had stood. No foundation, no stones, no cross. Nothing. I stood there for several minutes. Then I noticed the door. It was lying flat in the grass, a wooden church door, charred around the edges. I recognized it. I had seen it during my first visit. There had been a symbol carved into the inside. I hadn't paid attention to it then. Now I did. It was a circle divided into 4 uneven sections. At the center was a small vertical line. I had seen that symbol before, in Matthew's hospital room, on the underside of his bed. I had assumed it was a manufacturer's mark. It wasn't. I knelt. The ground beneath the door was wet. It hadn't rained. I touched the mud, warm. Then I heard a voice behind me. "You came alone." I stood quickly. A woman was standing at the edge of the field. She looked about 60. Dark coat, gray hair, no umbrella. She carried a leather case. "Who are you?" She smiled. "My name is Sister Helen." "Which order?" "None." "Then you're not a sister." "Not anymore." I stared at her. She approached slowly. "You interviewed him?" I didn't answer. "Abel?" My stomach tightened. "How do you know that name?" "Because I was there." "At the facility?" "No." She looked at the ruined door. "At the first interview." I felt the same cold sensation I had experienced underground. "What first interview?" "The one you don't remember." She opened the leather case. Inside was a small cassette recorder. Old, scratched, dusty. She placed it on the door. "I've been waiting for you to come back." "Why?" "Because he was wrong about one thing." "What?" "He said you had chosen." She looked at me. "You haven't." I stared at her. "Then what am I doing here?" "Following a memory." "What memory?" She pressed play. At first there was only static. Then I heard my own voice. "You should not have brought me here." I stepped backward. That was my voice. But it was younger. Much younger. Sister Helen watched me. The recording continued. A man's voice said, "Do you know why you're here, Daniel?" My younger voice answered, "Because you said someone needs help." The man's voice laughed. "Not Abel. Someone else." Then came a sentence that made my knees weak. "That's not why you came." The recording stopped. I looked at Helen. "Where did you get this?" "You gave it to me." "I've never met you." "You don't remember meeting me." She took a small photograph from the case. She handed it to me. It showed a room, a table, 2 chairs. A younger version of me sat in one. Across from me was a man whose face had been scratched out. I knew the room. I had seen it before. In dreams. Always in dreams. I had believed it was a memory from childhood. It wasn't. It was the room where I first met Abel, 31 years ago, before I became a priest, before I understood what demons were. Before I believed any of this was real, I looked at Helen. "Why did I forget?" She said, "Because you asked him to make you forget." "Why?" "Because you were afraid." "Of him?" "No." She paused. "Of yourself." That answer followed me back to my car. I drove without turning on the radio. For almost an hour, I said nothing. Then I pulled over. I opened the cassette recorder. I played the recording again. This time, I heard something I hadn't noticed before. Behind the voices, a ticking sound. 3 ticks. Then silence. 3 ticks. Then silence. I checked the time. 4:44. The recorder stopped. I pressed play again. Nothing. Then my phone rang. It was my sister. I answered. "Daniel?" Her voice sounded frightened. "What happened? Did you call me?" "No. I got a voicemail from you." "I didn't leave you a voicemail." She started crying. "What did it say?" She was silent then. "It said Dad was coming home." My hands went numb. "Delete it." "I already did." "Delete the message." "I did." "Then delete it from recently deleted." "Daniel, please." She began crying harder. "I don't understand." Neither did I. But I understood one thing. My father had been missing for 39 years. He had been declared dead 11 years after disappearing. No body was ever found. No grave existed. And now something had begun using his voice. I drove back toward Pennsylvania. I didn't know where else to go. The next time I stopped was outside a small motel. I checked in under a false name. That night I didn't sleep. At 3:33, someone knocked on my door 3 times. I sat on the bed. The knocking stopped. Then a voice came from the hallway, my father's voice. "Daniel." I closed my eyes. "Open the door." I didn't answer. "I know you're awake." Silence, then. You always were stubborn. My father had said that to me when I was 12. Exactly the same words. I felt tears in my eyes. I had spent most of my adult life believing I had accepted his death. I hadn't. I had simply learned how to function around the hole it left. The voice continued. "Your mother blamed herself." I covered my ears. She thought she should have stopped me. I began praying, not loudly, just enough to hear myself. The voice laughed. "You still think prayer makes you different?" I stopped, because that wasn't my father's voice anymore. It was Abel. "Open the door." "No." Silence, and then, "Good." I opened my eyes. The room was empty. The door was still locked, but there was a piece of paper beneath it. I picked it up. There was one sentence. "He is learning to imitate the dead." I knew immediately what that meant. If something could imitate the dead, then it could imitate memories. And if it could imitate memories, it could imitate choices. I returned to the church site the following morning. Sister Helen was waiting. She had built a small fire. "You're late." "I was followed." "I know." "By what?" She looked into the flames. "Not what." "Then who?" She said, "Your father." I stared at her. "My father is dead." "Yes." "Then it isn't him." "No." "Good." She looked at me. "You're beginning to understand." I sat beside her. "Tell me everything." "I can't." "Why?" "Because you won't believe me. I've seen things I can't explain. That's different." "How?" "You've seen the supernatural." She turned toward me. "You haven't seen the mechanism." "What mechanism?" "The thing beneath the thing." She opened the leather case again. This time she removed a stack of photographs. Dozens, old photographs. People, buildings, churches, hospitals, battlefields. Most were damaged. Some were burned. Some had been taken before color photography existed. But every photograph contained the same symbol, the circle. 4 sections, 1 line in the center. What is it? Nobody knows. Who made it? We don't know. Why does it keep appearing? We know that. I waited. It appears wherever someone makes a decision that should have been impossible. I frowned. That's not an answer. It is. She showed me a photograph of a battlefield. Civil War. A soldier stood in the middle of the frame. His weapon was lowered. Around him, dozens of men were aiming rifles. Everyone around him was ordered to fire. Who was he? We don't know. What happened? He refused. She showed me another, a woman outside a burning building. She walked into the fire to save someone she had never met. Another photograph. A man standing before a firing squad. He refused to name the other prisoners. Another. A child holding the hand of an old woman. She had been told the woman was dangerous. Another. A priest kneeling beside a dying soldier. Enemy soldier? Yes. Why? He heard the man ask for forgiveness. I looked at the symbol. What does it mean? Helen shook her head. We used to think it was a mark of protection. And now? Now we think it's a warning. Against what? She looked at me. Against certainty. That word again. Certainty. I remembered Abel. Names are chains. I remembered Matthew. You don't believe God is listening anymore. I remembered the voice in the hallway. You have already chosen. And suddenly the pattern became clear. The thing wasn't trying to control people directly. It was trying to convince them that control already existed. That every decision had an explanation. That every act of courage was chemical. Every act of love was biological. Every act of sacrifice was conditioning. Every act of faith was fear. Every act of evil was inevitable. And once you believed that deeply enough, you stopped fighting. I asked Helen, how long has this been happening? She said, longer than humanity has recorded. How do you know? Because Abel told us. Who is us? She looked away. The people who tried to stop him. You were working with him? No. We were studying him. Why? Because he wanted to be studied. That answer chilled me. Why? Because he needed someone to understand what he had discovered. I remembered the interview. He had said he was afraid. Not of God, not of humanity, of the plan. What did he discover? Helen looked at me. That Satan wasn't inventing anything. What? He wasn't creating the plan. Then who was? She shook her head. He was only copying something. Copying what? She looked toward the woods. The first human. I stood. Who was the first human? She didn't answer. Tell me. You already met him. I felt my heart pounding. When? She looked directly at me. In the first interview. The photograph slipped from my hand. That's impossible. No. She spoke softly. You just don't remember what he looked like. I closed my eyes. The room from the recording came back. 2 chairs, a table. Me. Someone across from me, a man. The face scratched out. I remembered his hands. 5 fingers, a silver ring, a scar across his left thumb. Then I remembered something else. His eyes. They had been exactly like mine. I opened my eyes. Helen was watching me. Who was he? She whispered. Your father. I couldn't breathe. No, he wasn't your biological father. Then who? The man who raised you was. She shook her head. But the man in the room, she paused, was the first human. I felt something inside my mind resist. It was too much. Too absurd. Too impossible. Yet every part of me knew she was telling the truth. I remembered my father coming home one night. I remembered his coat, his hands, his voice. But suddenly I remembered something else. He had never once told me where he had been. Not in 39 years, not once. I asked Helen, what happened to him? He made a choice. What choice? He refused. Refused what? The first order. What was the order? She looked at me. To become certain. I didn't understand. She continued. He was the first human being who understood that he could choose. And something wanted to take that from him. I looked toward the woods. Did Satan? No. Then who? Helen's eyes filled with tears. We don't know. That was the first time I saw genuine fear in her. Then why call it Satan? Because that's what humans called it after. What was it before? She shook her head. We don't have a word for it. The wind moved through the trees. I heard a branch crack. Helen looked toward the sound. He's here. Who? She didn't answer. I turned. At the edge of the woods stood a man. Tall, gray hair, dark coat. Hands in his pockets. My father. He looked exactly as he had when I was 12. Not older, not younger. Oh, exactly. He smiled. I couldn't move. Helen whispered, "Don't speak to him." The man raised one hand. He waved. Then he said, "Daniel." I started crying. Not because I believed it was my father, because some part of me desperately wanted it to be. He smiled. "I've been waiting for you." Helen grabbed my arm. "Don't." The man looked at her. "You still think you're protecting him?" Helen's face went white. He turned back to me. "She doesn't know what you did." I looked at Helen. "What did I do?" She didn't answer. My father smiled. "You asked me to forget you." My blood went cold. The same thing Abel had said. "You asked me to erase your memory." Why? Because you were afraid of what you had chosen. I stepped forward. Helen pulled me back. The man smiled. "Ask her what happened to your mother." I turned to Helen. "What happened to my mother?" She closed her eyes. She remembered. Remembered what? Everything. My father's expression changed. For the first time, I saw anger. Then he said, "That's why she had to forget." I stared at him. "Did you kill her?" "No." "Then who?" He smiled. "You did." I shook my head. "No." "You chose." "No." "You chose to leave." I was 12. "You chose." I backed away. Helen stepped between us. "Don't listen." My father looked at her. "You still believe choices are sacred?" She said nothing. He laughed. "They aren't." Then he looked at me. "They are only doors." "What does that mean?" "You can choose which door to open." He smiled. "But I decide what is behind it." The world seemed to become very quiet. Then I understood the final piece. That was the real plan. Not removing choice, controlling consequences. If every decision could be manipulated so that every path led to the same destination, then free will technically remained. But it became meaningless. You could choose. You could struggle. You could pray. You could resist. And still arrive exactly where the thing wanted you to go. That was far more terrifying than simple possession, because you could never prove you had lost. You would believe you had chosen freely, and that belief would be the prison. My father stepped closer. "Come with me." I shook my head. "Why?" "Because you are tired." He smiled. "You spent your life fighting something you don't understand." He held out his hand. "I can show you the truth." I looked at his hand. For 1 second, I wanted to take it, not because I trusted him, because I wanted my father back. Then I remembered something. Abel's final warning. You should have asked what happened to the first human. I looked at the man in front of me. "You're not my father." He smiled. "No." "You aren't the first human either." The smile disappeared. "Then what are you?" He stepped backward. And for the first time, I saw the thing beneath the face. Not a monster. Not a demon. Something worse. An absence. A shape where a person should have been. A place where identity had been removed. I understood. It wasn't pretending to be my father. It was using my memory of him as a container. I said, "You don't know who he was." The thing tilted its head. "You don't know either." "Maybe." I took a step forward. "But I know who I am." It smiled. "Do you?" I said, "I choose." The smile disappeared. Helen whispered, "Again." I said it louder. "I choose." The woods became silent. The thing looked at me. Then it said, "That is what he wanted you to say." My heart stopped. "Who?" It smiled. "Abel?" I turned toward Helen. She was crying. "Father." I looked at her. "Tell me the truth." She couldn't. The thing laughed. "You still don't understand." "What?" "Abel didn't refuse Satan." I felt the ground disappear beneath me. "What did he do?" "He volunteered." I looked at Helen. She closed her eyes. The thing continued. "He needed you to believe he was afraid." "Why?" "Because you would only make the choice if you believed it was yours." I whispered. "What choice?" The thing smiled. "The same one you made 31 years ago." I remembered the room, the table, the chair, Abel, my younger self. And suddenly I remembered the missing conversation. Abel had asked me, "Would you rather know the truth and lose your freedom, or keep your freedom and never know the truth?" My younger self had answered, "I want the truth." And Abel had smiled. That was the moment. That was the choice. I had chosen knowledge, and everything that happened afterward had been built around it. The priesthood, the exorcisms, Matthew, the facility, the interview, even this moment. I had believed I was investigating the demon, but perhaps the demon had been investigating me. I looked at Helen. "Why bring me back?" She whispered. "Because you were the only one who could finish it." "Finish what?" She pointed toward the woods. "The choice." The thing wearing my father's face stepped forward. "You have one decision left." "What is it?" "Forget." The word was almost tender. "Forget all of this." I stared at it. "You mean everything?" "Your father, Matthew. Your mother, Abel, God. Your faith. It will all disappear." "What happens then?" "You go home." "To my life?" "Yes." "Do I remember you?" "No." "Do I remember this?" "No." "And the plan?" "No." I looked at Helen. "What happens to everyone else?" The thing smiled. "They continue." "Continue what?" "Choosing." I almost laughed. "Then what's the difference?" The thing stepped closer. "They won't know the difference." I understood. That was the temptation. Not power, not immortality, not wealth. Peace. The chance to forget everything I had seen. To become ordinary. To stop caring Matthew. To stop dreaming about my father. To stop wondering whether my faith was strong enough. To stop asking whether God was silent. To simply forget. And for the first time in my life, I understood why temptation worked. It rarely offers what you shouldn't want. It offers what you desperately need. I closed my eyes. I thought about Matthew, his frightened face, his final words. "You don't believe God is listening anymore." Then I remembered what I had said to him. I hadn't remembered it until that moment. I had leaned toward him and whispered, "Choose." He had looked at me. Then he smiled. Just once. And died. I opened my eyes. I remember. The thing looked confused. "What?" "I remember everything." Step backward. "No," I smiled. "That's my choice." The wind stopped. The woods became completely still. The thing wearing my father's face began to change. Not violently, quietly. Like a photograph losing its image. My father's features faded. His hair, his eyes, his mouth. Everything disappeared until there was only a blank human outline standing before me. Then it spoke. Not with one voice, with hundreds. Children, old men, women, soldiers, priests. People I had never met. People I recognized. People who were dead. All saying the same thing. "You cannot remember forever," I answered. "No." The voices stopped. "I don't have to." Then I turned away. I walked toward Helen. She was crying. "What did you do?" I asked. She shook her head. "Nothing." I looked back. The thing was gone. There was only the field, the broken church door, and a single footprint in the mud, barefoot. Human. I walked toward it, then stopped. Because beside the footprint was another, and another, a trail leading away from the field. I followed it for nearly half a mile. It ended at a road. There was no one there. But on the asphalt was a small metal object, a military identification tag. I picked it up. The number was 0317, my father's number. On the back, scratched into the metal, were 4 words. "He chose you first." I kept that tag, I still have it. And I finally understand why the thing wanted me to forget. Memory is not just the record of what happened. Memory is evidence that something happened. If you remember choosing, then you can choose again. If you remember resisting, you can resist again. If you remember forgiving, you can forgive again. And that is why I believe Abel was telling the truth about one thing. The enemy is not trying to make us evil. Evil is easier than that. It is trying to make us certain that we cannot change, certain that our worst impulses define us, certain that our failures are permanent, certain that tomorrow must look like yesterday. Because once we believe that, we stop choosing. And when we stop choosing, something else begins choosing for us. I never found Abel. I never found Colonel Rusk. I never discovered what happened to Sister Helen. She disappeared 2 weeks after the night in Pennsylvania. Her apartment was empty. No belongings, no fingerprints, no record of employment. It was as if she had never existed. But I still have the cassette. Sometimes I listen to it. There is one section I never heard until recently. At the very end of the recording, after my younger voice asks for the truth, there is a long silence. Then Abel says something, very quietly. So quietly that I had to increase the volume to hear it. He says, "Then I'll see you when you're ready." I always assumed he meant the interview. I was wrong. He meant now. Because last night, at exactly 3:33, my bedroom door opened. I was awake. I didn't move. A man stood in the hallway. I couldn't see his face. He didn't come closer. He simply said, "You remembered." I asked, "Who are you?" He answered, "You know." Then he disappeared. This morning, I found something on my desk, a photograph. It shows the room from my first interview. I am sitting at the table. Across from me is Abel. But there is something else in the photograph. Someone standing behind me. A man with one hand resting on my shoulder. My father. I enlarged the photograph. There is writing on the wall behind us. I hadn't noticed it before. 3 words. They are written backward. I held the photograph in front of a mirror. The words became readable. They said, "You chose correctly." I don't know what that means. I don't know whether I saved myself. I don't know whether I saved anyone. And I still don't know whether Abel was telling me the truth. But there is one thing I know now. The next time someone tells you that you cannot change, listen carefully. Because sometimes the voice saying it isn't yours. And sometimes It has been waiting inside your memories for years. I used to think the worst thing a demon could do was convince a person that God had abandoned them. Now I think there is something worse. Convincing a person that they were never free to begin with. Because if you believe that long enough, you don't need chains. You don't need possession. You don't need hell. You simply stop reaching for the door. And the most terrifying thing Abel ever taught of me was this. A prison does not need walls when the prisoner has been convinced that the door was never there. For 3 weeks after the photograph appeared on my desk, nothing happened. That frightened me more than anything else. I had learned over the years that supernatural events rarely remain dramatic for long. The mind wants a climax. Reality doesn't care about narrative structure. Strange things happen, then stop. People recover. Buildings are demolished and reports are filed. Memories become uncertain. So when nothing happened, I began to believe I had finally escaped. I returned to ordinary work. I celebrated Mass. I visited nursing homes. I sat with families in hospital waiting rooms. I heard confessions. I prayed. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, I became myself again. Or what I thought was myself. Then one Sunday morning, an elderly woman came to confession. She was perhaps 75. Her hands trembled. She sat behind the screen and remained silent for almost a minute. I waited. Finally, she said, "Father, I don't know if this is a sin." "What is it?" "I remember something that hasn't happened. I felt my heartbeat change." "Tell me." "I remember burying my husband." "Is your husband deceased?" "No." "When did you remember this?" "Yesterday." She started crying. "I remembered the funeral. I remembered what I wore. I remembered who stood beside me. I remembered the priest." I swallowed. "Was the priest me?" "No." Her voice dropped. "It was you." I closed my eyes. "What happened in the memory?" She whispered, "You told me not to choose." I sat very still. "What did you choose?" "I don't know." "That's what frightened me." She began to shake. "I remember making a decision. But every time I try to remember what it was, something changes." "What changes?" "The room." "What room?" "The funeral." I heard my own voice ask, "Did you recognize the church?" "No." "Then how do you know it was a church?" "Because I could hear the bells." I waited. "Father?" "Yes?" "Do you hear them too?" I looked toward the windows. Outside there were no bells. Then I heard one. Just once. A deep metallic sound. My blood went cold. The woman whispered, "They're getting closer." The confession ended immediately. I asked another priest to speak with her. I never saw her again. But that afternoon, I found a small envelope inside my coat. I had not put it there. Inside was a photograph. The woman from confession stood beside her husband. Both were smiling. Behind them was a church. I recognized it. It was the church from the first interview, the one that had supposedly been demolished. I turned the photograph over. On the back was a date, 31 years in the future. I stared at it for a long time. Then I noticed something else. The woman in the photograph was not 75. She looked 30. The man beside her looked about 40. And standing behind them was me, older, much older. My hair was almost completely white. I was wearing the same black clerical shirt I wore that day. But I wasn't looking at the camera. I was looking at something behind it, something that frightened me. I took the photograph to my bishop. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he asked, "Do you still believe the demon exists?" I thought about it. Yes. Do you believe the demon is responsible? No. He looked surprised. Then who is? I don't know. He folded his hands. That's the first honest answer you've given me. I looked at him. Have you seen anything? He was silent. Then he opened a drawer. Inside was a file. He placed it on the desk. The file was old, very old. The paper had yellowed. The first page contained a photograph. A young priest. I recognized him immediately. My father, except he wasn't my father in the photograph. He was wearing a Roman collar. My hands began to shake. What is this? My predecessor gave it to me. When? 27 years ago. Why? He told me never to open it unless you came to me asking about your father. I stared at the photograph. What was his name? The bishop didn't answer. Father. He pushed the file toward me. I opened it. There were reports, handwritten notes, medical records, photographs, and one document from the Vatican. It contained a single sentence. The subject is not to be considered possessed. I looked at my bishop. Then what was he? The bishop said, we never determined that. I turned the page. There was a second sentence. Do not allow him to discuss the first human with Father Mercer. I stopped breathing. Why? Because your father asked us not to. I looked up. My father? The bishop nodded. He came here 31 years ago. After disappearing? No. Before? My hands went numb. That's impossible. He told us you would eventually come looking. Why? The bishop's eyes filled with tears. Because he knew you would forget. I closed the file. Forget what? He whispered. That you were there. I didn't understand. Then he reached beneath the desk. He pulled out an old cassette recorder. My chest tightened. Another recording. Another voice. This one was my father's. He said, if Daniel remembers me, don't stop him. The recording continued. If he remembers the room, tell him the truth. A pause. If he asks whether I was human, tell him yes. Another pause. If he asks whether I was his father, tell him no. I stared at the recorder. The bishop stopped it. That's all? No. There's more? There was. What happened? He looked at me. The rest was recorded after you left. What did he say? The bishop hesitated. Then, he said something about Abel. My stomach tightened. What? He said, he will tell Daniel that Satan wants to control humanity. I waited. But, he said, that isn't the truth. The room seemed to grow colder. What did he say the truth was? The bishop looked directly into my eyes. He said Satan doesn't want to control humanity. Then what does he want? The bishop whispered. He wants humanity to control itself. I sat back. That sounded like the same idea, but it wasn't. Not exactly. And I suddenly understood why Abel had always been so careful with his words. Control was not the objective. Self-control was. A world where people voluntarily restricted themselves. A world where every person became their own jailer. A world where fear, shame, guilt, ideology, hatred, and certainty became internal chains. No demon required, no possession, no supernatural intervention. Just people policing their own thoughts. I remembered the elderly woman. She had said she remembered a choice, but she could not remember what it was. Maybe that was the beginning. Not controlling decisions, controlling memory. If you could erase the memory of choosing, then you could make a person believe their current condition was inevitable. And if enough people forgot they had ever chosen differently, the future would become predictable. I looked at the bishop. Where is the rest of my father's recording? He hesitated. Burn? Why? He ordered us to. Did you? No. Where is it? He looked away. I knew the answer. Someone had kept it. I found it 3 hours later. Not in the bishop's office, in the basement archives, behind a row of old parish registers. The tape was labeled with a date. The date I had first met Abel. I put it into an old player, static. Then my father's voice. Daniel, if you're hearing this, then you remembered. I closed my eyes. I don't know whether Abel told you the truth. A pause. I don't know whether he ever told anyone the truth. His breathing sounded strained, but I know why he refused. The tape crackled. He didn't refuse because he hated Satan. He didn't refuse because he loved humanity. He refused because he realized something. A long silence. Every demon believes humanity belongs to God. Another pause. They are wrong. I opened my eyes. My father's voice continued. Humanity belongs to itself. I stared at the recorder. That is the one thing Satan cannot understand. The tape hissed. Because he believes freedom is the ability to choose. Another pause. He's wrong. I leaned closer. Freedom is the ability to become someone your past could not predict. The tape stopped. I sat alone in the archive. That sentence changed everything. A person wasn't free simply because they could select between options. Freedom meant transformation. A cruel man could become merciful. A coward could become brave. A liar could tell the truth. A bitter person could forgive. A person who had always chosen hatred could choose love. That was what the enemy wanted to destroy. Not choice, change. If the future could be made to resemble the past closely enough, people would eventually become predictable. And if humanity became predictable, something could write the future. I took the tape upstairs. The bishop was waiting. Now, you know. No. I placed the recorder on his desk. I know part of it. He nodded. There's more. What? Your father. I stared at him. He wasn't human? He was. Then why did he say he wasn't my father? Because biologically he wasn't. Who was he? The bishop looked down. Your father died before you were born. I felt the room spin. My mother told me he disappeared. She lied. Why? Because she was protecting you. From what? The bishop whispered. From the man who raised you. I sat down. He continued. Your mother married a man named Thomas Mercer. My father. No, he shook his head. Thomas Mercer died in 1962. I stared at him. My birth certificate says your birth certificate was altered. By whom? The church. Why? Because the real truth was considered too dangerous. I felt anger rising. You've known this my entire life? No. How long? Since you were 12. The same year. The same year my father disappeared. The same year my mother started forgetting things. The same year I heard the phrase, nothing you choose is ever truly yours. I looked at him. What was Thomas? A man. Then who raised me? The bishop said, we don't know. I laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. You're telling me my entire childhood was a lie? No. He looked at me. We're telling you that someone wants you to believe that. That's not an answer. It is the only one I trust. That night I returned to my apartment. I sat at the kitchen table until sunrise. I didn't pray. I didn't sleep. I looked through old photographs. my mother, my sister, my father, family vacations, Christmas mornings, school pictures. Everything looked normal. Then I noticed something. In every photograph containing my father, I was looking directly at him. Always. Even as a baby. Even in photographs where I should have been looking at the camera, my eyes were fixed on him. I zoomed in on one photograph. My father was holding me. Behind him was a mirror. In the mirror, my father's face was different. Older, not human-looking, not monstrous. Just unfamiliar. I enlarged another. Same thing. Another. Same. The mirror never showed the face I remembered. I called my sister. She answered immediately. "Daniel? Do you remember Dad?" Silence. "Of course." His face. Another silence. "What about it? Do you remember what he looked like?" She began crying. "Why are you asking me this?" "Please," she whispered. "I don't." My blood went cold. "What do you mean?" "I remember his voice. His face. No. His hands? Yes. His eyes?" She stopped me and then, "I don't remember his eyes." I closed my eyes. Neither did I. Not really. I remembered believing I did. But every time I tried to picture them, the image changed. Brown, green, gray, dark. Nothing stayed. The memory wasn't missing, it was unstable. That was the mechanism. Not erasure. Modification. A memory could be altered just enough to make a person doubt their own experience. And once doubt became habitual, certainty became impossible. I understood why Abel had chosen me. I had spent my entire life surrounded by manipulated memories. The first interview, my father, my mother's death, Matthew, perhaps even my vocation. Maybe I had not become a priest because God called me. Maybe I had become a priest because someone wanted me in a position where I would influence other people's choices. That thought almost destroyed me. I went to the chapel. I knelt. For the first time in years, I prayed without asking God for an answer. I simply said, "If I chose this, let it be mine." Nothing happened. No voice, no vision, no miracle. And somehow that silence comforted me. Because if God had answered, I might have wondered whether the answer was mine. Then I heard footsteps. Someone entered the chapel. I didn't turn around. A voice spoke behind me. "You finally understand." "Abel," I closed my eyes. "Are you real?" "Yes." "Are you a demon?" "Yes." "Did you lie to me?" "Many times." "Did you tell me the truth?" "Sometimes." "Why?" "Because truth is more useful when people distrust it." I turned. He was standing in the doorway. Same gray hair, same hospital clothes, same calm expression. "How did you get here?" "You invited me." "I didn't." "You prayed." "I pray every day." "Not like that." He came closer. I stood. "What do you want?" "Nothing." "That's a lie." He smiled. "I want you to understand." "Understand what?" "Why I chose you." "You said because I was the only one who would come." I lied. "Why me?" He looked toward the altar. "Because you have spent your entire life believing that faith means trusting what you cannot prove." "Isn't that what faith is?" "No." He looked at me. "Faith is choosing without certainty." I said nothing. "That is why you were dangerous." "To whom?" "To him." "Why?" "Because you can still choose when you don't know whether you're right." I felt something inside me settle. "Then what do you want me to choose?" Abel smiled. "Nothing." "What?" "That is the point." He stepped closer. The final trap is believing you must make the right choice. I frowned. You don't. Then what do I do? Choose what you believe is right. And if I'm wrong, you will choose again. I stared at him. He whispered, "That is what he cannot tolerate." Then the chapel lights went out. I heard Abel leave. When the lights returned, he was gone. But someone had written on the altar, not in blood, not in ink, in candle soot. One sentence. "You don't have to be certain to be free." I touched the words. They disappeared beneath my fingers. I thought that was the end. Again, I was wrong. Because 2 days later, I received a letter from the Vatican. It contained no explanation, only a flight itinerary, and one instruction: come alone. The destination was Rome. The departure date was tomorrow, and beneath it was a handwritten note. We found the original room. I knew immediately what that meant. The first interview. The room where I had met Abel 31 years earlier. The room where I had apparently made the choice that began everything. The room I had forgotten. I went. Not because I trusted the church, not because I trusted Abel, not because I believed I was chosen. I went because I had spent too much of my life allowing other people to decide what I remembered. And I was finally tired of being afraid of my own mind. The room was beneath an old monastery. There was no electricity and no cameras, no guards, only a wooden table, 2 chairs, and a small crucifix on the wall. I recognized it immediately. I had seen it in my dreams. I sat down. Nothing happened. Then the door opened. A young priest entered. He looked familiar. Too familiar. He closed the door. "Father Mercer." "Who are you?" "My name is Father Elias." "Have we met?" He smiled. "No." He sat across from me. Then he said, "But you remember me." I stared at him. He reached into his coat. He placed a photograph on the table. It showed the room. The photograph was dated 31 years earlier. In it, I sat in the chair. Across from me was Abel, and behind Abel stood Father Elias. The same age, the same face. Exactly. I looked up. "You haven't aged," he smiled. "No? Who are you?" He leaned closer. I am the reason Abel refused. I felt the old fear return. "You're not human." "No." "Are you Satan?" He laughed. No." "Then what?" His expression became serious. "I am what happens when a choice is remembered incorrectly." I didn't understand. He continued. "You think memories record decisions." "They do." "No." He pointed at my chest. "Decisions record memories." I waited. "When you choose something, your mind creates a story explaining why you chose it." "That's psychology." "Yes," he smiled. "That is why it works." I felt cold. He continued. "If I can change the story, I can change the meaning of the choice." "Meaning?" "You can remember choosing freely." He leaned closer. "And still have no idea why." I understood. The entire mechanism depended on interpretation. Not changing what happened. Changing what people believed had happened. A person could perform an act of courage and later remember it as fear. A person could forgive and remember it as weakness. A person could resist and remember it as failure. Eventually, they would stop trusting the version of themselves that had chosen differently. That was how freedom disappeared. Not by force, by revision. Father Elias looked at me. "That is what Satan discovered. And you?" "I discovered something else." "What?" He smiled. "Humans are capable of remembering themselves differently." Meaning? You can rewrite the rewrite. I stared at him. Then why did Abel refuse? Because he realized the system could not distinguish between a false memory and a true one. Why does that matter? Because if enough people remembered themselves as free, he stopped. I finished the sentence. The system would fail, he nodded. And that is what he has been doing. Abel? Yes. All these years? Yes. Manipulating memories? No. Father Elias smiled. Restoring them. The room seemed to change. Suddenly I understood the interviews. The historical cases, the photographs. The people who made impossible choices, the symbol. The reason the symbol appeared wherever someone had chosen differently. It wasn't a mark of the enemy. It was a marker left behind by Abel, a reminder. You chose, you can choose again. Father Elias stood. You were never brought here to learn how demons work. Then why? To remember that you are human. He walked toward the door. I asked, what happens now? He stopped. Now you decide whether you believe me. Then he left. I sat alone in the room. The crucifix on the wall seemed very small, almost insignificant. I looked at it. For years I had thought faith was about certainty. That night I realized I had misunderstood. Faith was not knowing that I was right. Faith was choosing what I believed was right while knowing I could be wrong. That was freedom. Not certainty, not control, not prediction. Choice in the presence of uncertainty. And that was the one thing no demon could ever fully possess. I left the monastery before sunrise. No one stopped me. No one asked what I had learned. When I returned to America, I went to the cemetery where my mother was buried. I sat beside her grave. I talked to her for the first time in years. I told her I was sorry. I told her I remembered. Then I heard someone behind me. I didn't turn. A man's voice said, she remembered too. I closed my eyes. Abel? No. I turned. There was no one there. Only a small wooden cross lying in the grass. I picked it up. On the back was a date, the date of my birth, and beneath it, he is coming when you stop choosing. I stared at those words. Then I understood something that still frightens me. The plan had never been about making humanity stop choosing forever. That was impossible. It was about waiting. Waiting until people became tired. Waiting until they surrendered one decision at a time. Waiting until they stopped believing change was possible. Waiting until they stopped surprising themselves. Because a predictable human being is almost indistinguishable from a controlled one. I don't know how many people have already fallen into that trap. I don't know how many memories have been altered. I don't know how many people are living lives they believe they chose freely when somewhere deep inside they are simply repeating decisions they made years ago. But I know what I do now. Every morning, I make one deliberate choice. Something small, something unnecessary. I take a different route. I call someone I haven't spoken to. I forgive something I would rather hold against someone. I read a passage of scripture I don't understand. I pray without asking for certainty. Sometimes I even change my mind, especially when changing my mind is difficult. Because I want to remain unpredictable. Not to demons, not to Satan, not even to myself. I want to remain capable of becoming someone I have never been. That is the freedom I believe was given to us. And perhaps that is why evil hates it. Not because humans are powerful. We aren't. Not because we are righteous. We aren't. Not because we are intelligent. We can be remarkably foolish. but because even after everything, we can still become different. A year after the interview, I received one final message. It came from an unknown email address. There was no subject, only an attachment, a photograph. I opened it. My hand started shaking. It showed a small church, not the Pennsylvania church, not the monastery. Another one, a church I had never seen. Inside were dozens of people sitting in pews. Every face was turned toward the camera. At the front stood Abel. Beside him was Father Elias. And between them was a young boy. The boy was 12. He was looking directly at the camera. It was me. I stared at the photograph. Then I saw the date, 31 years before my birth. I nearly dropped the computer. I zoomed in. There was writing on the wall behind us, the same circle, 4 sections, 1 line. And beneath it, a sentence. This is where he learned to choose. I printed the photograph. I studied it for hours. I searched every archive I could access. Nothing. No church. No record. No photograph. No explanation. Eventually, I stopped searching. Because I realized something. I had spent years trying to prove that these things were real. That was the mistake. Proof was not the point. The point was what I did with what I believed. So I kept the photograph. I keep it beside my bed, not as evidence, as a reminder. Every morning I look at that 12-year-old boy. He looks frightened, but he is standing. He is still choosing. And sometimes when I look at him long enough, I notice something in the photograph that wasn't there before. The boy is smiling, not at the camera, at someone standing just outside the frame. I have never been able to see who it is, and perhaps I never will. But last night, for the first time, I heard the voice again. It came from the photograph, a quiet voice, an old voice, a voice that sounded almost amused. It said, "Daniel." I looked at the picture. The boy was still smiling. Then the voice said, "You finally remembered why I chose you." I asked, "Why?" The answer came after a long silence. "Because you were the first one who said no." I stared at the photograph. Then I understood the last piece. The first interview had not happened when I was 29. It had happened when I was 12. The room, the table, Abel, my father, all of it. I had been there. I had made the first choice, and someone had spent 31 years trying to make me forget it. I don't know what I said no to. Not yet. But I know this. Whatever it was, it is still waiting. And somewhere in the dark, something very old is still hoping that one day I will become tired enough to say yes. I don't intend to give it that satisfaction. Because now I understand the one truth that frightened even a demon. You don't have to know what comes next to remain free. You only have to remain capable of choosing it. I was wrong about one thing. I thought remembering the first choice would be enough. It wasn't. For the next 11 days, nothing happened. Then on the 12th day, I received a package. There was no postage, no address. It had simply appeared on the front steps of the rectory sometime before dawn. Inside was a small wooden box. The box was old, older than anything I owned. There was no lock, no hinge that I could see. Only a narrow seam around the lid. I carried it inside and placed it on my desk. I did not open it immediately. I had learned enough to understand that curiosity was not always a virtue. Sometimes curiosity was simply another word for permission. So I prayed first. Then I waited. Nothing happened. Finally, I opened the box. Inside was a key, a small brass key. Attached to it was a piece of paper. 5 words. The room was never underground. I stared at the message. The facility in Pennsylvania had been underground. I had seen it. I had walked through the corridors. I had sat in the interview room. I had spoken to Abel, but now I remembered something strange. I had never seen the entrance. I remembered being driven there. I remembered the elevator. I remembered descending. I remembered the steel door, but I did not remember entering the building. That omission had never bothered me before. Now it did. I called the number Colonel Rusk had given me. It had been disconnected. I searched public records. Nothing. I searched military databases. Nothing. I contacted a priest I knew in Pennsylvania. He had never heard of the facility. I searched satellite images. There was no building at the coordinates I remembered. The church site was empty. The road was there, the field was there, but there had never been a facility. I sat at my desk until midnight. Then I noticed the key again. There was something engraved on it. A number. 317. I knew that number. My father's identification number ended in 0317. But this was different. There were 3 digits. 317. I turned the key over. On the back was the symbol, the circle. 4 sections, 1 line. And beneath it, almost too small to see, choose the door. I didn't sleep that night. At 5:12 in the morning, I received another call. This time, the number was my own. My phone showed my name. My own number. I stared at the screen, then answered. For several seconds, there was silence. Then I heard my voice, older, tired, terrified. Daniel! I couldn't speak. The voice continued. Do not open the door. What door? A pause. The one you already opened. The line went dead. I looked toward my apartment door. It was closed. Then I noticed the brass key on my desk. It was no longer there. I stood. I checked the floor. Nothing. The key had vanished. Then I heard metal turning inside the lock. Slowly, the door opened. No one stood outside. The hallway was empty. But there was a staircase where the hallway should have been. I had lived in that building for 7 years. There was no staircase. I knew every inch of it. Yet there it was. A narrow staircase descending into darkness. I stood at the threshold. The air coming from below smelled like dust and old paper. Then I heard a voice. Daniel? Abel, I closed my eyes. Are you there? Yes. Why? Because you finally remembered the door. What is beneath it? Your first decision. I stepped onto the stairs. The door behind me closed. I didn't turn around. I descended. There were exactly 31 steps. I counted them. At the bottom was another door, wooden, unpainted. The brass key was already in the lock. I touched it. Before turning it, I asked, if I open this, can I leave? Abel answered from the other side. Yes. Will I remember? No? Then why open it? Because you already did. I turned the key. The door opened, and I saw the room, the same room, the table, the 2 chairs, the crucifix, the bare walls, everything exactly as I remembered, except there was someone sitting in the chair across from me. A 12-year-old boy. Myself. He looked at me. I looked at him. Neither of us spoke. Then the boy said, "You came back." I couldn't breathe. He smiled. "You promised." What did I promise? That you would remember. Remember what? The boy looked toward the empty chair beside him. Why you said no. I stepped into the room. The door closed. My younger self looked at me. You're older. Yes. Did it work? What? Did you become what they wanted? I didn't answer. He smiled sadly. I knew you wouldn't. I sat across from him. What happened here? You don't remember? No. You chose. I know. No. He shook his head. You chose before they gave you the choices. I felt cold. What does that mean? The boy looked toward the crucifix. Before the first question, they asked you something. Who? They. Who are they? He looked at me. Everyone who wants you to believe there are only two choices. I didn't understand. He continued. They gave you two doors. Which doors? One said truth. The other said freedom. I waited. You wanted both? Of course. The boy smiled. That's why you failed. What did I choose? You chose neither. I stared at him. Then what did I choose? The boy leaned closer. You chose to remain uncertain. The room became silent. I suddenly understood. That was why Abel had been so careful. Why the entity had hated certainty. Why every revelation had been designed to push me toward a conclusion. The trap was not choosing truth. The trap was choosing certainty. The moment I believed I understood everything, I became predictable. But uncertainty kept me free. The boy stood. That's why they couldn't control you. Who are they? He walked toward the wall. He placed his hand against the symbol. The circle seemed to move beneath his fingers. Look. The wall opened. Not physically. It simply became transparent. Beyond it was another room, then another. Then another. Hundreds, thousands, each containing a person. Men, women, children, soldiers, priests, patients, politicians, criminals. People from different centuries, different countries, different languages, all sitting alone, all facing a table, all being asked the same question. I stepped closer. What am I seeing? The experiment. What experiment? The attempt to prove that human beings can be made predictable. I looked at the people. How? They give each person a choice. Then what? They watch. Watch what? Whether the person chooses what they were expected to choose. And if they don't? The boy smiled. They changed the memory. I felt sick. So this has been happening for centuries. Longer. Who is doing it? The boy looked at me. You still think there is one person behind it? Isn't there? No. He pointed toward the endless rooms. That's the mistake. I stared. It's not a single enemy. Then what is it? A system. The word frightened me more than any name could have. A system. Not a demon. Not Satan. Not one ancient being. A process. Something that could continue without a single mind controlling it. The boy continued. It began when the first human being asked another human being what they should choose. I frowned. That's normal. Yes. But then the answer became more important than the choice. I understood. Authority, tradition, fear, social pressure, parents, governments, religions, ideologies, families, communities. Every structure that tells people what they are supposed to be. None of those things were inherently evil. That was what made the idea terrifying. The system did not need evil people. It only needed people to surrender responsibility for their decisions. And once enough people did that, the system could reproduce itself. The boy said, "That's why Satan is only a name." For what? For the part of the system that wants certainty. I looked at him. Then Abel. Abel was part of it. Still is? Yes. Why did he refuse? Because he discovered the system had begun predicting demons, too. That stopped me. Demons? The boy nodded. Demons believed they were choosing to serve evil. But they were following patterns. I remembered Abel's expression, his fear, his hesitation, his hatred. Then Abel realized he wasn't free. Not completely. So he rebelled. No. The boy shook his head. He remembered. I sat down. Remembered what? That he had once chosen differently. The room seemed colder. Abel had been human? The boy didn't answer. Instead, he walked toward the second chair. He placed his hand on it. Sit. I did. The boy sat across from me. Exactly as Abel had years earlier. Then he said, "Ask me the question." I knew what he meant. "Why did you say no?" The boy smiled. "I didn't." I froze. "You did." "No." He shook his head. "You did." "Then who did?" He leaned forward. "You." The room disappeared. For 1 second, I saw everything. My childhood, my mother, my father, the first interview, Matthew, the underground facility, the monastery, Abel, Helen. Every conversation, every choice, every moment I had believed I was reacting to something outside myself. And then I saw the truth. I had been choosing. Every time. Even when I thought I had no choice, especially then. The system had never been able to remove free will. It could only persuade people that their choices were predetermined. And I had spent my entire life proving it wrong without realizing it. The boy smiled. "Now you understand." I opened my eyes. The room was dark. The boy was gone. Someone was standing behind me. I didn't turn. I knew the voice. "Abel, you finally remembered." I whispered, "What are you?" He answered, "What I always told you." "A demon?" "Yes." "Then why did you help me?" He was silent. "Why?" "Because I wanted something." "What?" "To choose." I turned. Abel stood behind me. He looked older now, not physically. Something about him seemed exhausted, like a man who had been awake for centuries. "You helped me because you wanted to prove you were free." "No." "Then why?" He looked at the empty chair. "Because I wanted to know whether I still could be." I understood. Abel had not betrayed Satan because he had become good. He had betrayed him because he discovered he could refuse. And once he refused once, he had to keep refusing. Not because refusal made him righteous, because refusal proved he was capable of choice. That was his salvation, if demons could have such a thing, not becoming good, becoming capable of becoming different. I asked, "Can demons change?" Abel looked at me. "That is the question you should never ask." "Why?" "Because if the answer is yes," he paused, "then everything changes. And if the answer is no, then I have been lying to myself for centuries." I looked at him. "Which is it?" He smiled. "I don't know." For some reason, that answer frightened me more than anything else he had ever said. Because Abel was finally uncertain, and for the first time he looked free. The room began to shake. The walls trembled. The symbol on the wall began to rotate. Abel looked toward it. "He knows." "Who?" "The one who doesn't need a name." "Is he coming?" "No." Abel looked at me. "He is already here." I felt a pressure behind my eyes. Then I heard a voice. Not from the room, from inside my own thoughts. "You have spent your life looking for him." I closed my eyes. The voice continued. "You never understood that I was never hiding." I whispered, "Who are you?" answer came immediately. The part of you that wants certainty. I opened my eyes. Abel was gone. The room was empty. The boy was gone. The walls were blank. The crucifix was gone. Only the table remained. And on it was a sheet of paper. I picked it up. There was one question. Would you rather know the truth or remain free? I stared at it. I didn't answer. For a long time, I simply sat there. Then I folded the paper, I put it in my pocket, and I walked out. The staircase was gone. I was standing outside my apartment. Morning sunlight was coming through the windows. My phone said 7:02. Only 20 minutes had passed. I looked at my hands. They were shaking. I went to the bathroom. I looked into the mirror. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then my reflection smiled. I didn't. The reflection whispered, "Good choice." I stepped backward. The reflection returned to normal. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't tell anyone. I couldn't, because I finally understood the last trap. Even now, telling you this story is a choice. You can believe me. You can reject everything I've said. You can decide I'm mentally ill. You can decide this is fiction. You can decide demons are real. You can decide they aren't. And perhaps that is exactly why I am telling you. Not to convince you, to remind you. Because if the thing I encountered was telling the truth, then certainty is the one thing we should fear most. Not doubt, not uncertainty, certainty. The moment someone tells you there is only one way to think, one way to live, one explanation for everything, one enemy, one answer, one future. Be careful, because sometimes the most dangerous prison is the one that makes you feel intelligent for staying inside it. I still don't know what happened to Abel, but once every few months, usually around 3:33 in the morning, I receive an email. There is never a subject, never a message, only an attachment, a photograph. And every photograph shows someone making a choice. A prisoner refusing to betray another prisoner. A mother forgiving the person who killed her son. A soldier lowering his weapon. A dying man reaching for the hand of someone he hated. A child telling the truth when lying would have been easier. Different people, different centuries, different circumstances. But every photograph contains the same symbol somewhere in the background. The circle. 4 sections, 1 line. And in every photograph, there is someone standing just outside the frame. Sometimes it's Abel. Sometimes it's me. Sometimes it's a person I don't recognize. But in the most recent photograph, it was you. I don't know how that is possible. The photograph showed a person sitting alone in a dark room. I could not see the face, but I recognized the room, the table, the 2 chairs, the symbol. And across from the person was an empty chair, waiting. On the back of the photograph were 4 words. Your choice is next. I burned the photograph. The fire went out by itself. The paper remained untouched. I burned it again. Same thing. 3 times. On the 4th attempt, I stopped. I kept it. Not because I want to know what happens, because I don't. And that may be the most important thing I've learned. I used to think courage meant facing the unknown. Now I think courage sometimes means allowing the unknown to remain unknown. There are questions we should answer. There are truths we should seek. But there is also a temptation hidden inside knowledge. The belief that if we understand enough, nothing can surprise us. That is how certainty begins. That is how the system wins. And if Abel was right, then the final battle was never going to happen in some supernatural war between heaven and hell. It would happen quietly, inside ordinary people. Inside ordinary decisions, a husband deciding whether to forgive, a woman deciding whether to leave, a soldier deciding whether to fire, a child deciding whether to tell the truth, a dying person deciding whether to forgive. Small choices, invisible choices. Choices no demon would consider important, and yet those are exactly the choices that keep the future open. I don't know if Satan is real. I don't know if Abel is still watching. I don't know whether the system has a name. But I know this. Something wanted me to believe my life had already been decided. Something wanted me to believe my past was stronger than my future. Something wanted me to believe I was the sum of everything I had already done. And I refused. Not once, not twice, every morning, again and again. Because maybe freedom isn't one grand decision. Maybe freedom is the decision to keep choosing. And perhaps that is why Abel was afraid. Not because Satan could destroy him, but because once a creature realizes it can choose differently, obedience is never the same again. I haven't seen Abel in 8 months. Last night, though, I heard him. I was sitting alone in the chapel. The church was empty. The lights were off. I was reading when someone sat down in the pew behind me. I didn't turn. Abel said, "Father." I closed the book. "What now?" He was silent for several seconds, then, "I was wrong." I turned. No one was there. "About what?" His voice came from somewhere near the altar. "The door." "What door?" "The one I told you to open." I stood. "What was behind it?" A pause, then, "Nothing." I felt cold. "Nothing?" "No." "Then why did you fear it?" His voice became quieter. "Because I thought the absence was empty." I waited. "It isn't." "What is it?" Silence. Then Abel said, "God." I stopped breathing. The chapel seemed to disappear around me. "That's impossible." "I know. You're lying." "I hope so." The voice was shaking. For the first time, Abel sounded terrified. "What did you see?" "I saw what remains when every choice is removed." "What?" "Not darkness." "Then what?" He whispered. "Possibility." I didn't understand. "Every choice that could have been made." He continued. "Every life that could have existed. Every person you could have become. Every act of mercy. Every betrayal. Every prayer. Every refusal. Every yes. Every no. All of them." I stood completely still. "And God?" Abel answered. "Not watching." I waited. "Choosing." The chapel went silent. Then Abel said one final thing. "That's why Satan is afraid." And he was gone. I never heard his voice again. But sometimes, when I pray, I think about that final sentence. Not because I know whether it is true, because I don't. I think about it because it reminds me that certainty was never the gift I was looking for. The gift was choice, and choice is frightening. Because it means we are responsible. It means we can fail. It means we can hurt people. It means we can choose wrongly. But it also means we can change. We can apologize. We can forgive. We can walk away. We can begin again. We can become someone our past did not predict. That is what I believe now, not because a demon told me, not because a priest told me, not because Scripture gave me an easy answer. I believe it because I have seen what happens when people forget, and I have seen what happens when they remember. The first creates obedience. The second creates freedom. So if you are listening to this because you are afraid of something in your own life, something you believe you cannot escape, something you think defines you forever, remember this: your past may explain you. It does not own you. Your fear may influence you. It does not command you. Your mistakes may follow you. They do not have the final word. And whatever voice tells you otherwise, you do not have to obey it. You can choose, even now, especially now. Because somewhere in the darkness, something may be waiting for you to believe that you have no choice. And the moment you believe it, you will give it exactly what it has wanted all along. Not your soul, not your life, not even your faith, your future. So choose carefully. Not because there is always a correct choice, but because choosing at all is the one thing that keeps tomorrow from becoming yesterday. And if Abel was telling me the truth, that is the one thing even hell cannot predict. For the first time in months, I slept without dreaming. No voices, no footsteps, no doors, no Abel, nothing. When I woke up, the photograph was still on my bedside table, the one I had tried to burn. I didn't touch it. Instead, I made coffee and went to church. I thought routine would help. It usually did. But when I entered the sanctuary, I immediately knew something was wrong. The candles were lit. Every single one. I hadn't lit them. Neither had the other priests. There were 43 candles in the church. I counted them twice. 43. And in front of the altar was a chair. An ordinary wooden chair, facing the congregation. I stood there staring at it. Then I noticed the symbol. It had been carved into the seat. The circle, 4 sections, 1 line. I walked closer. There was writing beneath it. Only 3 words. Sit and remember. I stepped backward. No. The church doors slammed shut. I heard the sound of a lock turning. Then a voice came from the empty pews. You don't have to. I recognized it. Abel. Where are you? Behind you. I turned. Nothing. Then I heard him laugh. Not cruelly, almost sadly. You still look for faces. What do you want? To tell you something before they do. Who are they? You know. I don't. You've met them. Where? Everywhere. The candles began flickering. That's not an answer? It is the only answer. The voice became quieter. They don't live in one place. Then how do I stop them? You don't? I frowned. What? You can't stop a system by fighting its members. Then what do I do? Refuse to participate. I looked at the chair. You want me to sit? No. Then who does? You. I stared at it. I already refused. No. Abel's voice became serious. You refuse certainty. What does that mean? It means you still think you're outside the system. The candles went out. All at once, darkness filled the church. Then I heard footsteps. 1, 2, 3. Someone walked slowly down the center aisle. I couldn't see anything. But I heard breathing. Then a man's voice said, Father Mercer. I knew that voice. My father. I didn't answer. Daniel? Still nothing. I know you're there. I closed my eyes. The voice changed. My mother's voice. Daniel. I opened my eyes. Then Matthew's voice. Father. Then Helen. Then Colonel Rusk. Then Abel. One after another. All of them calling my name. I realized what they were doing. They weren't trying to frighten me. They were trying to make me respond. Because response creates participation. I stayed silent. The voices continued. My mother begged me. Matthew cried. My father apologized. Helen screamed. Rusk threatened me. Abel whispered. Daniel. I said nothing. Minutes passed. Then silence. The lights returned. The church was empty, except for the chair, and on the chair was a sheet of paper. I picked it up. It contained one sentence. You passed. I almost laughed. Then I realized the danger. If I believed I had passed the test, I had already accepted their rules. I tore the paper in half, then into quarters, then smaller. I dropped the pieces into the trash. A voice behind me said, Good. I turned. A woman was standing in the doorway. She was wearing a black coat, gray hair, a familiar face. Sister Helen. I stared at her. You're alive. She smiled. That depends on what you mean by alive. I approached her. Where have you been? Watching? Watching what? You. Why? Because you're close. To what? The end. I felt a chill. What end? The experiment. I shook my head. I thought you said it was a system. It is. Then how can it have an end? She looked toward the altar. It can't. Then why say there is? Because they believe there is. Who? She looked directly at me. The people running it. I felt my stomach tighten. People? Some. Who else? She smiled. You've met the rest. I remembered Father Elias. Abel. The thing in the woods. The voices. Are they demons? Some are. Angels? Some. Humans? Most. I stared at her. You're telling me humans built this? No. She shook her head. Humans inherited it. From whom? She looked at the chair. From the first choice. I was beginning to hate that phrase. The first choice was made by a human. Yes. And the system began afterward? No. Then when? Before humans. That stopped me. Then what made it? Helen whispered. The need to choose. I didn't understand, she explained. Before there was good or evil, there was uncertainty. And something wanted certainty. What something? We don't know. So it created the system? No. It discovered the system. I stared at her. What does that mean? It discovered that uncertainty can be reduced by predicting choices. Exactly. And who discovered it? She looked at me. God. I felt the room go silent. I didn't speak. Helen continued. Not because God created evil, she looked toward the crucifix, but because creation itself requires possibility. Meaning? If every outcome is known and fixed, choice becomes meaningless. So God created uncertainty? Perhaps. Then Satan discovered how to exploit it? She nodded. He wanted to remove uncertainty. Why? Because uncertainty terrifies beings who cannot control the future. I thought about Abel. He had always feared uncertainty, but he had also embraced it. That was the contradiction. Then what is Satan trying to do? Helen's voice became barely audible. Make creation predictable. I stared at her. Why? Because if nothing can surprise God... She stopped. I finished the thought. Then nothing can truly be free. She nodded. I looked toward the chair. Suddenly, it no longer looked threatening. It looked sad. A symbol of everything that could have been. Helen said, You need to understand something. What? The demon you interviewed wasn't the most dangerous thing in that facility. Then what was? The interviewer. I froze. What? The man who asked the questions. Abel? No. She shook her head. Not Abel. Then who? She looked at me. You. I stared at her. I was 12. Exactly. I didn't conduct the interview. Not consciously. What are you saying? She stepped closer. Abel wasn't interviewing you. I felt the old memory opening. The table, 2 chairs, my younger self, the dark room, the question, the fear. Helen whispered, "You were interviewing him." I couldn't breathe. What? You asked him the questions. No. You asked him why demons obeyed Satan. I remembered. You asked him whether demons could refuse. My head began hurting. You asked him whether God could forgive a demon. I remembered the silence, then Abel's face. You asked him whether he wanted to be free. The room spun, and suddenly I remembered his answer, not from the recording, not from the photograph, from the actual memory. Abel had looked at me and said, "Yes." I whispered. What happened next? Helen's eyes filled with tears. You told him how? I stepped backward. I was a child. Yes? How could I know? You didn't? Then who did? Helen pointed toward the chair. Something was sitting there. I stared. The chair was empty. But for one brief second, I saw someone sitting in it. A 12-year-old boy. Not me. Someone else. He looked directly at me, then vanished. Helen whispered, "That's the first human." I shook my head. No. You've seen him before. When? In the photograph. The one before my birth? Yes. The boy? She nodded. I looked toward the empty chair. What does he want? Helen answered. To be remembered. Why? Because he was the first one to forget. I felt something inside me collapse. Forget what? That he was free. The church doors opened. Cold air rushed inside. Helen stepped backward. You have to go. Where? Home. Why? Because tonight, someone is going to knock on your door. Who? She looked terrified. The first human. I wanted to ask more. But she was already walking away. Helen, she stopped. Are you coming? She didn't turn. No. Why? Because I already opened my door. Then she disappeared into the darkness. I returned to the rectory before sunset. I locked every door, every window. I turned off every light. Then I waited. 11 p.m. Nothing. Midnight. Nothing. 1 a.m. Nothing. 2 a.m. Nothing. At 3:33 a.m. 3 knocks. I stopped breathing. Knock, knock, knock. And then silence. I didn't move. A voice came from outside. Not my father's, not Abel's, not anyone I recognized. A child's voice. Father. I closed my eyes. Father, please. I stayed silent. I know you're awake, I whispered. Who are you? The child answered. You? I looked toward the door. I am 12 years old. The voice said, I know. What do you want? To come home. I felt tears forming. You aren't me. Yes. Prove it. Silence. Then the child said something only I should have known. Mom hid the blue box beneath the floorboard because Dad told her never to let you see it. My heart stopped. I had never told anyone about the blue box. I had forgotten it existed. I opened the door. The hallway was empty. But at the end of it stood a boy, 12 years old. Wearing the clothes I remembered from that year. He looked exactly like me, except for his eyes. They were not mine. They were Abel's. The boy smiled. You remembered. I couldn't speak. He stepped closer. Do you want to know what was in the box? I nodded. He whispered, your future. I felt the world tilt. What? He smiled. Come with me. Where? Back to the room. I've already been there. No. He shook his head. You've only seen the room they wanted you to see. Then he turned and began walking. I followed. Not because I trusted him, because I finally understood. The first interview had never been the beginning. It had been the middle. And whatever happened before it was the part everyone had spent 31 years trying to erase. I followed the boy into the darkness, and this time, I knew exactly what I was choosing.